Electrical engineers are under the fallacy of believing that capacitors and inductors store energy. It's true they receive it, but they don't store it. They immediately convert it into reactance, and reactance is not energy. And when they discharge energy, they think, oh, see, the energy I put in has come out. No, it converted it, or else it would not have been able to come out for you to see it. It would be instead a fantasy that you have to deduce or infer from the math involving the square root of -1. But no evidence will be there to show you that it is actually releasing energy as in the format that it stored it, or in the format, I should say, that it received it. Because it doesn't. It doesn't store energy. It's incapable of storing energy. But it does receive energy, that's true. And this may seem like a fine point or nitpicking, but no, it's not. Because if we continue to assume that inductors and capacitors store energy that they receive and release energy that exits them, then we continue to operate under the illusion that conservation of energy applies to electrical reactance when it does not. It does not, because these two types of components of electrical engineering do not store energy. That's the bottom line. And unless an engineer can wrap their minds around that fact, they are never going to understand overunity or free energy, or how electrical reactance plays such a pivotal role in the operational mechanics of free energy. Physics doesn't help. It muddles the situation even further. I was astounded to learn where conservation of energy comes from. Because I never knew. I just thought, well, physicists made it up. Yes and no. It's in Kirchhoff's laws. I believe it's the current law, Kirchhoff's current law, in which the current passing through, or into, I should say, into a node has to equal the current coming out of that node. Well, a node is a fiction. It's a concept, just like current is a fictional concept, a mathematical construct. Well, so are nodes. And they help you analyze a circuit, but gee, guess what? My simulator that I run on analyzes the circuit and uses Kirchhoff's laws, but for some uncanny reason, I get overunity or underunity, usually overunity, sometimes of an explosive nature, which is not complying with the conservation of energy. So obviously it doesn't match reality, and if its conservation of energy has nothing to do with E equals mc squared, because it has nothing to do with matter. It has to do with the empty void between components that we conceive and put a point there, a geometric point that has no dimension and has no mass and has no energy. A node, a geometric point to locate a spot in between two components. To say that conservation of energy has anything to do with that node is so bogus, it's unbelievable, but it's merely for the purposes of performing computations to figure out what's going on. It has no relevance to the physical world. Do I have to shout loud enough? No relevance whatsoever to the physical world. It is a geometric concept. So current is a mathematical concept in which we replace. Let's see if I can say this correctly. We replace reactance. We replace reactive voltage divided by impedance with a singular symbol we call current, the letter I, the capital letter I. It's a mathematical fiction when we talk about current, because voltage times current is not the true value of Ohm's law. Well, that's just one man-made construct. But now this other one I'm learning about is conservation of energy. Coming out of Kirchhoff's current law is a fiction, because it's not based on anything in physical reality. It's merely there to help you compute the behavior of the circuit at the nodes between the components. It says nothing about what's going on in the components themselves, yet we infer, oh, well, this is happening at this node on one side of a capacitor, and then something else is happening at another node on the other side of that same capacitor. And we can deduce from this what is happening in the component, but we're deducing it. We're not computing it. We're merely computing the activity of energy passing through nodes, or I should say computing the value of current, because this is what I'm focusing on. I'm not focusing on voltage drop. I have no qualms against voltage. So probably the only thing electrical engineers get right is when they deal with voltage, because at least they're being honest. At least they're being accurate to reality when they're dealing with voltage. They don't mess it up. And voltage actually is the original human conception of electricity was voltage. They didn't know about anything else. The idea of current and magnetism came along much, much later. It was made famous by Faraday, but some people in history were vaguely aware of something else other than voltage, but it was never really codified until, I guess, Faraday came along and codified it. But prior to that, mostly all we knew about was voltage, because it's very easy to get it right and very hard to get it wrong. But when it comes to magnetism and current, we always get it wrong. We don't get it right. Never. And nothing's changed. 1.5 centuries ago, we got it wrong with the telegraph cable, the transatlantic telegraph cable. Whitehouse, a fellow by the name of Whitehouse, fried a cable because he thought to himself, I know what I'm doing. I'll just give it more voltage. It didn't work. We were already giving it voltage. Why don't we give it more? No, you have to preserve the loss of magnetism along the length of that transatlantic cable. That's how you fix the problem, or one way you fix the problem. And there are 3 magnetisms to choose from. Maybe all 3 are involved, but as it turned out, only one was necessary to focus on: ferromagnetism. How do we retain that magnetism? We wrap the bare copper cable with iron ribbon and then seal it with a very thick insulation, and now we've got ourselves the transmission of the power required to transmit the signal. Otherwise, we didn't get a signal. It came delayed or not at all. And if it was delayed, it was distorted. But if it didn't show up, then the voltage was left there all by itself, and there was no electricity to give us a dot or a dash at the Morse code key at the terminal end of the message being sent. So that's one fiction, but this other one of conservation of energy is unbelievable. I'm flabbergasted that we take it so seriously, and the United States Patent Office and the South African Patent Office, for that matter, and probably all the others, most of the others, or if not all of them, will say the same thing. You can't have that's a perpetual motion machine device. You can't have that. Nope, sorry, we won't even look at it. Well, who said anything about perpetual motion running on nothing? That's their definition of perpetual motion, is to run on nothing. That's bogus. It always has to run on something. And even if you feed some of the output back into the input, so what? You still got to get it going from a cold start. That took something, even if that's the only energy you ever give it, if it never stops running. So it's really, we get things, we think we're so slipshod. We're so lazy and slipshod and messy that, we don't mind if we miss, that's libel, If you don't get your facts straight, somebody could sue you for libel. Try to take on the United States government and all the physicists backing them up for libel. It won't happen, obviously, because it's one raging against the world. A wolf crying in the wilderness. Ow! Ow, ow, ow! Yeah, it's me, crying in the wilderness. As one of my critics pointed out to me, I'm just a drop. I'm a nothing. Oh, how nice. Thank you very much for that compliment. I didn't say anything. It was worth walking away from. It doesn't make me feel all peachy inside to hear what I know to be true, but it's not relevant. In fact, if anything, it's nothing for him to be proud of, to be casting that stone in my direction, because he's the victim, not I. I know better, he doesn't, but he's playing the game of fitting in and reputation that goes with that. And all these websites like Stack Exchange that rewards people for toting the party line and not thinking for themselves. God forbid we should do that. We're really slaves. I wish we could say we're servants of the corporate world that we live in, but I don't think so. It's more like slavery, because it's based on reward and punishment. If the slave misbehaves, you flog him, right? Or if you're captain on your ship, Moby Dick, or whatever, Captain Ahab, or one of these other stories, I forget the name of the captain, mutiny on the Bounty. Mutiny on the Bounty. Yeah, if you don't like what your sailor is doing, you flog him in front of everybody else, just to make sure they don't do the same thing. I mean, that's kind of like what kind of society we have. We don't outright flog people, but we fail to reward them is what we do. And they end up poor, impoverished, and wondering, I'm going to have to fit in to make money and to be able to survive, because nothing's for free. So this is a privileged world we live in. So, oh boy, I better tote the party line, or else, especially if I'm an electrical engineer or a teacher of electrical engineering, I better tote the party line, or else I'm going to be out of a job and not going to be able to feed my face. Well, I don't tie money, income, to what I study. I learned a long time ago it's best not to do that, so that there is no vice. I mean, it's literally a vice to have a vested interest, because then it has nothing to do with the thing you're doing anymore. Now the vested interest has all the meaning and portent and priority, whereas the thing you're doing has no priority. It's just a means to an end, like people who take up doctor or lawyer profession, not because they want to heal people or help people, but because they want to make money, and that's a good way to make it. Oh, God. I can go on, but this is the way society functions, and this is probably why we don't deserve free energy, and probably why we don't understand it, because we're not interested. And if our authority figure tells us it's bogus and a con and a sham, then we believe it, and we go about our business, and we don't bother to investigate. Well, I see myself as an investigative journalist, independent, funding everything out of my own pocket so that I can remain independent. And I study a topic. I pick a topic that I think, I smell a fish here, and a stinking rotten fish to boot. I bet I'd find out the details if I took the trouble to study it, and that's all I do. I take the trouble, which most people don't take the trouble. I firmly believe that the way electrical engineering is taught is wrong. It's backwards. Lecture is of no importance whatsoever. The only important thing in studying electrical engineering is the lab experience. And then, whatever you can discern from your experience, you can go to the teacher and ask questions based on your experience and see what he has to say. And that'll help you, obviously. It'll help speed you along. But only if you have the experience with which to ask a question. It's no good saying, well, someone told me, blah, blah, blah. Who cares? You go find out for yourself, and if I think you're fibbing, then you show me the experiment that you derived those hunches or conclusions from, so that I can give you information related to that set of experiences, those details. Otherwise, as teacher, I don't want to talk to you. Go back to the lab and do more lab work. Whether it's on the bench with physical circuits or in the simulator or both, that's the only way to teach the topic. And so, yeah, everybody's going to be different. They're not going to have the same understanding that way. It's not going to, but see, that's not the way the corporate world operates. They want everybody to be like a cookie cutter, all look the same. And that the only way to do that is to do lecture and avoid experience. And then when you go into the field, you're told to ignore your experience if it doesn't conform with your lecture, what you learned in school. And, the teacher knows what he's talking about, so why should I believe Vinny saying something contrary? Well, I usually like to say things that are simple because I never got beyond algebra. I know a paltry amount of trig, no calculus whatsoever. I can't stand matrix algebra. I don't go near it with a 10-foot pole or a 100-foot pole. I do simple stuff only, and so if I can't conceive of something in simple terms, I just don't bother dealing with it. Despite the fact I may want to know, it doesn't mean I get to know. And this idea of conservation of energy is always thrown in people's faces as the backdrop or the logic, the rationale behind, perpetual motion machines of the first type, second type, third type, as if they're talking about ET encounters, of the first type or second type. Another load of fiction. I mean, it's amazing how we create parallelisms of fiction in our society. I mean, if you want to see an ET, just look in the mirror someday, That's about as far as that business gets. Anyway, so the main point of this recording and this ranting has to do with conservation of energy not coming from anything physical. And electrical reactance doesn't either. And neither does current. All three are fictional, man-made constructs. How do you like that? I hope nobody goes to jail, gets crucified, or burned at the stake for a fiction.